Hey everyone, this is Ian Miller. Welcome back to another episode of True Brother Comics YouTube channel. I'm here today with Michael Carlin and Michael Jane Friedman. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Good to be
Yes,
here.
it's the League of Mikes.
Yes, the League of Mikes. We're here today, obviously, to talk about the life and friendship of Peter David. And who better to talk to than two people that know him pretty well and worked with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with Peter from pretty early in my career because I started at Marvel on staff in '82, and he kind of joined Marvel on staff early '80s, '83 or four, in the marketing department. He came on to work with Carol Kalish to help sell our comics to comic stores and such. So I've known him a very, very long time. I've only honestly worked with him directly one time on the Marvel versus DC series with Mark Grunwald and Ron Mars. And otherwise, I guess I was the executive editor when he was doing Supergirl and Young Justice for DC.
Yeah.
And those were both great comics for us.
Yeah. I worked with Peter quite a bit, probably as much as anybody. We Shortly after I met him, we had a little softball outing in Nassau County for Star Trek novelists, and at that you can imagine the action, and and we
That's how many novelists there were for Star Trek. Woo! A whole baseball team's worth.
still have softball teams and still have a bench. Um, so he and I and Bob Greenberger and a woman named Carmen Carter said, wouldn't it be cool if we did a novel together? And so we did that. We worked out a way to do it. Bob kind of put together the outline based on everyone's comments. Then we all went on our separate ways to write pieces of the outline. And then we came together and I did a polish. And unbelievably, it worked.
That's
So
amazing.
that was the first time I collaborated with Peter. And then Bob and I collaborated with him again on two other Star Trek novels, and then on many other projects. So that was the beginning of a very satisfying partnership. Um, Not every collaboration, I'm sure Mike knows this as well. Not every collaboration goes as well as that one, but that was one we kept going back to over and over again over the years.
Well, that's good to hear because it doesn't always work smoothly. And I ran the Superman titles kind of like a writer's room like that for years. And when Mark Grunwald and I were assigned by Paul Levitz and Terry Stewart to do something to goose sales, we came up with the Marvel versus DC thing at Mark Grunwald's apartment with Peter David and Ron Mars. We spent the whole day there. And I honestly have to say, it was the most fun a fanboy ever had working on superhero comics, because we came up with that whole amalgam gag where we got to mush Marvel characters and DC characters together. And we were laughing, we were shocking each other. It just kept getting bigger and bigger as we were going. And I've done a lot of those kind of writers' room things, and it was just four guys, and we had a ball. And I think the readership reacted to that as well. It was very surprising. And honestly, in this day and age, we wouldn't even be able to keep a secret like that from the internet of just what that whole amalgam thing was going to be. And it really was great fun. And there was no arguing or fighting or anything like you would expect. There was no Yoko in the room, so we were all okay. And we made some beautiful music together.
really did. I mean, that was a great project.
It
And,
really was fun. I still
you-
feel bad that Marvel got more votes than DC did. But everybody knows that Wonder Woman would have kicked Storm's ass anyway. So in real life,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I think that was one of Peter's strengths, is that he was a fanboy at heart, and as we are, and
Yeah.
and he connected with the fans on that basis. He had a great intuition as to what the fans would most like to see.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. He also had what I liked best, which I think a lot of writers in comics, at least, I don't know about Star Trek, he had a sense of humor, and he would put flat out dad jokes in the stories and name characters stupid names just because wouldn't it be funny if this guy had this name? And it was just like, we're dealing with flying people in these stories. Why can't we have some fun with this? And he was really good at that, and he knew when to turn it off too. So that's what was good about his work, I thought.
You know, there was a time early in Peter's Star Trek novel career when in addition to the regular approvals process at Paramount, Gene Roddenberry had an office, and he really didn't have anything to do, and he had an assistant to help him do not much. So the assistant meddled in all the novels, and he particularly meddled in Peter's novels because Peter would take liberties for the sake of humor, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And Peter and this guy went head to head. You know, it wound up going to court. You know, Peter said, he said you're limiting my ability to make a living. And it was crazy.
Wow.
But it was a real feud.
Oh my God. I'd never heard that story. And
whoa.
It's imagine fighting with the guy who is credited with making up what you're fighting about.
Well, not Roddenberry in particular. It was Roddenberry's assistant.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Peter would get up at a panel and start describing the latest events in his feud, and he would say, "Well, I can't tell you the guy's name, but his initials are," and then he would tell you the guy's name.
Yeah. Yeah, he would screw around like that. One time at DC, he put in a pitch. I forget what it was for, and we didn't approve it. It just didn't work for whatever reason. And because he had the column in the Comics Buyer's Guide, he just ran the pitch there, basically saying, "This is what stupid DC didn't approve of." Oh. And it's like, that's not cool. I didn't know I should have taken him to court. Yeah, because it was like he published a story that had a bunch of DC characters in it. I guess I could have.
Yeah.
But it just like he wouldn't let his stuff not be seen or heard. And I guess that's a good thing to be or have in you.
Yeah, nothing lay fallow for long.
Right.
He found a home for pretty much everything.
It's true. It sounds like he found a home for a lot of his stuff in his car and in his closets, because he gave me a lift to the train station after Julie Schwartz's memorial, and I don't know how I fit in that car. There was so much stuff in there. It was almost like he was living in the car, but I know he wasn't. Yeah. But I guess he kept everything he liked in life. And again, that's a good way to be. As long as he can find everything, that's good.
Well, he was a fan, and he had this fanish impulse to collect, and he did. If you ever visited his house, he had next to his kitchen, he had a little room, and you would open up the doors, and there'd be like a space about 4 by 4 with a pole in the middle of it. And you would open up the floor on either side of the pole and go down the pole into his basement, which he set up as a bat cave.
I did hear he had a bat cave.
He had a bat cave it was black and gray, and it had stalactites.
Oh my goodness!
Oh my Lord!
So I imagine that halfway down the pole, he's naked at one point. So I don't know if I want to do that because he's got to put that costume on.
TMI.
Well, he did. Do you remember he did that? He posed once naked with a comic book in front of himself.
Yeah, right.
On a couch. God. I can't believe that's not all over the internet. It must be. It must be. So there's everybody's project for the weekend. In honor of Peter David.
Oh my God! If it's on the internet, it's obviously out there now.
It's got to be, man.
Oh my Lord!
I mean, Stan did stuff like that too, so he's not the only one who's done that.
Yeah.
So all the great comic book writers. I guess that's what held me back. I never did that.
You never posed naked.
Well, I'm not gone yet, so beware, everybody.
It's still time. One thing, Peter had a relationship with Stan, and it was hero worship relationship, really. And Peter had this knack of becoming friends with people, pop culture icons that he admired. So on the writing side, it was Stan, but it was also Mark Hamill.
Yep.
And Bill Mooney.
Bill Mooney. Yep, I know that.
Wow.
And others. He connected with a lot of those people. They're
fanboys too. They were all fanboys as well. But he really did. Like, I'm friends with them on Facebook. Not Mark Hamill, but Bill Mooney. But he really was friends with these guys, and he would collaborate with them all over the place. Yeah. And that I was jealous of that because I wanted to be Will Robinson when I was a little kid. I mean, I was like right age for that.
I never wanted to get too close to my heroes. Because they say your idols have feet of clay, and I was always afraid of that. I remember one time, Mike will appreciate this. One day I came into DC and was pitching some inventory stores on Hal Jordan and on John Jones, and Kevin Dooley was just too busy to listen. And he said, listen, we got to talk about this some other time. I'm trying to get an issue out here with Andy Helfer. So I was a little disappointed, but it was my birthday. So Bob Greenberger and Brian Austin took me out to lunch at Mickey Mantle's restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And they said, I'm sure Mike won't mind. It's a little pricey, but I'm sure he won't. And Mantle was there signing a book that he had just, and Mickey Mantle was my hero. He was my hero as much as anyone. And Brian was sitting in a booth, and Mantle sat down back to back with Brian. and Brian said, go get his autograph. And I said, I can't talk to him. I can't. What if he's an asshole? I can't.
Then you have a story. Then you got a story.
I can't put him on a higher pedestal, but I could certainly put him on a lower one. So I don't want to take that chance. And incidentally, that was the lunch that generated Dark Star.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
and that one we approved.
There you go. That's right. But
see, I don't have a problem meeting my idols or people I admire. I enjoy it because in a way, it's my chance to say I really like what you've done, and it's really great stuff. And so I don't have a problem saying hello. I won't like stalk them or badger them or anything like that.
Not
But
anymore.
yeah, no, I gave that up. One time I was riding the train and I saw Amy Poehler on the train, and I think she's really funny. I like what she does, and everybody was just like kind of whispering and pointing, but nobody was going up to her. And as we were both getting off at the same station, I just said to her, I said, "Hey, Amy, I really love what you do on Saturday Night Live." And she goes, "Thank you, sir." And I was like, "Sir, you're supposed to be giving me your phone number. What the hell is this sir stuff?" "Oh, I'm too old already." And Peter David was not there for that.
That was the one story that didn't have Peter in it.
It's true.
Um,
But yeah, I many of my idols I have met that turned out to be really great people, especially in comics. It's like Denny O'Neil and Walt Simonson. They're just great people, and I loved their stuff when I was a kid buying comics, and obviously meeting Julie Schwartz was great.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you would have told me when I was a kid that I would be begging Julie Schwartz to get out of my office so I could do some work, he'd come in and just talk and talk and talk, and I would say, "Hey, Julie, can you just look at this art or this cover and give me some advice?" And he says, "Nope, I never look at the stuff anymore. I never look at it anymore." He did give me some good advice. He told me that the Gillette Mach 5 was the best shaver out there, and it really is. It really does a good job. So that's the advice I got from Julie Schwartz.
Wish I had known that an hour ago.
Yeah. Well, they still sell them, I think.
I'm pretty sure they do.
But-
My Julie story is I was at a Lunacon up in Westchester, and Julie was up there, and he was in his 80s at the time, and I saw him standing in the hallway outside this hotel room, and I said, "Julie, everything okay?" He goes, "Oh yeah, just waiting for my ride home." And I said, "Oh, okay, good." But again, he's in his 80s. I said, I'll hang out with you till your ride's ready to leave." And so we're talking, and I had been counseled by others that when you have Julie, you pump him for stories.
Yeah.
So I pumped him for stories, and he's telling me about Adam Strange and Space Ranger, and how he came up with the name for the Atom. And after a while, this guy, whoever it is, that's supposed to give him a ride, is still not coming outside of
Oh my God.
the hotel room. So I said, "Julie, do you want me to give you a ride home?" I didn't know where he lived, but I said, "How far could it be?" He goes, No, that's okay. That's okay. He'll be out in a minute." And I said, "So where do you live anyway?" And he goes, "Oh, I live in Queens." And I said, "Oh, I grew up in Queens. Where do you live?" And he said, "Oh, I live near Springfield Boulevard and Union Turnpike." And I said, "I grew up near Springfield Boulevard and Union Turnpike. Thereabouts." And he goes, "Yeah, in an apartment building called Cambridge Hall." I said, "Julie, I used to deliver groceries to Cambridge Hall." Right? And I said, "Julie, do you know how lucky you are?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I know. I mean, all my life I've done things that I really enjoy. I worked with Ray Bradbury and First Fandom and all that." I said, "No, that's not what I'm talking about. When I was growing up, if I knew you lived in Cambridge Hall, I would have been at your door every day. Mr. Schwartz."
You might have gotten into comics sooner.
I had a feeling you were going to go there.
Yep. Yeah, you thought I was going? Okay. Well, I'll need a twist on that story next time.
But, so yeah, I wrote some Star Trek comics too, but I wouldn't consider myself a Star Trek guy like you and Peter by any stretch. I did some issues of the regular Star Trek comic, and I did I did the first Next Generation miniseries,
Right.
based on the Bible, which I think who wrote the Bible? Was it David Gerald? I think
Could be. Yeah.
one of those guys. And anyway, my stuff was based on the Bible. So my Captain Picard was actually French. And it makes that miniseries look so stupid now because we didn't know who were going to cast at that point. And like the artists had to scramble at the last minute once they put the cast together. Because I based it on the first couple of scripts, and they never said it was a British guy with a French name. They never said anything like that. And it just the miniseries looks stupid when people are saying things like "Sacre Bleu" and things like that.
Well, it's a relic of you look at the Abrams Star Trek movies, and you go, where did he get this stuff?
Yeah.
Spock in love with Uhura, and where did well, if you look at the first few Star Trek episodes, there is stuff in there that supports that.
Yeah. Well, because they were figuring it out as they went along, the same as we always do. And then for a while, I think you were writing Star Trek Next Generation, and I was somehow doing cover sketches for Bob Greenberger. And I would do these sketches, and they had to go to Universal or Paramount or wherever to get approved. And they were horrible because they never wanted, if you had phasers on a cover, they didn't want them shooting at anything. And I was like, they're shooting at a door, and they're trying to open a door on this cover with the phasers. They're not shooting a person. And they bounced the cover. They wouldn't let the cover go. It was really crazy. They were pretty tough. You must have had some good luck, or you figured them out pretty quickly, because there's no way you could have written the series with that kind of meddling.
I did figure them out pretty quickly, but I did have problems at the time. Just as Peter ran into headlong into this assistant at Roddenberry's office.
Right.
I did occasionally too, not as often as he did, and it didn't wind up in court. But I remember one time, the guy sent us a memo by fax, and we were only allowed to communicate once a day by fax, and they would send it in the morning, and we would respond in the afternoon. And the comment was, this is my first Star Trek novel. They said, take Chekhov out of the book. And I said, why? And they said, and their response the next day was, he's not on the ship at that time. And then we said, how do you know? Then they said, your star date. So there was a memo in the pocketbook's office that from Gene Roddenberry that said, ignore the star dates. We made them up as we went along.
Yeah.
And we listened to that, and no. When that star date took place, because we've since normalized them, and now you can't have Chekhov on the ship. So we sent them back a response. We said, let's get this straight. We can change 10 pages of dialogue, or we can change the star date. And they said, oh yeah, I guess so. We changed one number, and that solved the problem.
It's crazy.
So Peter wasn't the only one that had issues with them. I remember that there was one line he had one time. Riker was saying, I'd rather walk the neutral zone in my underwear. And the response he got was, it hasn't been established that our characters have undergarments.
That's why Superman wears his underwear outside. So it's established clearly for everybody. Well, yeah, and Peter was the personality to push on that kind of stuff for sure. I know that I would give in to whatever the Star Trek man said, and I always trusted Bob Greenberger to catch stuff before it got to them. But my stories, they were, cute, and I based a bunch of them on actual old episodes where I did a sequel to the TV shows, and they were pretty cool in letting the stuff go. It became a problem because at some point, Paul Levitz didn't want editorial staff having regular assignments and keeping freelancers from getting work. So
Yeah,
I got it. I dug that. He said, if you make up something and we go for it, then you can do anything you want, but you can't do anything regular, So
yeah.
I understood that. And I thought that made sense. So that opened up the Star Trek book for whoever.
Yeah. Well,
And Peter, Peter did some great stuff at DC. I mean, just the whole, Young Justice was basically a new version of Teen Titans because the Teen Titans had grown old enough to not even be teens anymore, really, in terms of their storylines. And it was obviously, it was a great title. I don't know if he came up with it or we came up with it, but it really was great, and it worked well for the animated series, which Peter actually wrote a bunch of the scripts for.
Yeah.
So we kept his hand in the Young Justice world once the animated series came, which wasn't directly based on what he did, but it definitely it was definitely the Young Heroes idea, which wasn't new, but I was glad. I always like keeping the comic book talent involved in either animation or when we were doing that Superboy television show, we got a bunch of comic book writers in the mix. And those are the best episodes by the guys who understand the material, and Carrie Bates ended up being a story editor for a season at least. And
Mike, did you write a story for that?
Oh yeah, me and Andy Helford we co-wrote about 15 of them.
Okay.
And it was fun. And it just was, they were the most comic booky episodes. Mark DeMatteis wrote a bunch of them, and Denny O'Neil wrote the 2 Mr. Mix's Pitalik episodes, and those were great. And I do, like I said, the tradition of getting comic book guys involved is important to me. So when Peter David was doing the Young Justice stuff, I thought that was really good. And the showrunner on Young Justice was a guy named Greg Weisman, who was an editor at DC for a while and an assistant editor. And he also was co-writer of Captain Atom with Carrie Bates for a long time. And I actually think he had a lot to do with kind of updating Carrie Bates's voice for a modern time, and that kept Carrie relative to the audience, I think. So yeah,
I think so, yeah.
And Peter wrote movies and stuff like that. I mean, he was able to get out there. I kind of wish that the Star Trek shows would use the novelists and the comic book writers more than they do.
Right. Well, I was fortunate enough to contribute to an episode of Star Trek Voyager.
Cool.
Peter, I think maybe it had something to do with his run-in with the guy with the parent. I think didn't necessarily get a fair shake at some Star Trek shows, but he did end up writing as you say, for animated shows, and also like Ben 10, and also what he did, the show, the Nickelodeon show with Billy Mooney.
Oh yeah, it was a Space Cases or something like that.
Yeah.
So he did, and also there was another show. There was another show, a live action show that he wrote scripts for. So he definitely had a presence in that part of the business.
Yeah, I imagine that his stuff on Star Trek, because it had more humor than most, was not something that they would respond to as well. Because I mean, if you look at the old show, there'd be a little wink line here and there, but it was never funny, except for the Tribbles episode.
Yeah.
Right, very simple, you know.
And they didn't do a lot of those. They did not. They kept it kind of heavy. And then once they got to doing movies, so that there wasn't 20 stories a year or whatever.
Yeah.
They were more stingy about that stuff. And it's partly why I think like Star Trek 4 stands out as a better movie, because it had some humor in it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Right.
But I mean, that is, again, it's my personal taste. It's one of the reasons why I don't think I would have had a great career as a comic writer, because I think comic fans also, they take stuff way too seriously in general. And Peter found a way to work that in comics. He really did. And I always thought that was good.
Except when he killed Betty Ross. Then it was something else.
Yeah, that wasn't funny.
Yeah.
No.
She'll come back.
They always come back.
They always come back.
One of the funniest things that I did with Peter and Bob was a thing called Mystery Trekkie Theater 3000. And
Great.
We modeled it after Mystery Science Theater, and we would take a Star Trek episode and tear it apart in the same way we did on that show. So we would
That's
it would
great.
be Bob and Peter and me at the bottom of the screen. We're showing the episode, and you can only see us in silhouette.
This was
And
at
we
comic conventions?
This is at
Star Trek
Shore
shows?
Leave every
Oh,
year.
wow.
Yeah, Shore Leave every year, nowhere else, only at Shore
That's
Leave.
great.
Like 25 years.
Oh, my
And,
God.
And it was, we would actually write a script. In fact, Peter got up at the beginning of every performance and said, "We actually have a script. You know, what you have in mind might actually be better than what we did, but we did it. So don't call out."
Yeah, so shut up.
So we had a script, and when there was a lull in the action, we would have a comment for every lull, and it was hilarious. And the performance was always funny and well received. But what was really, really hilarious was writing it. We
Yeah.
would sit in Peter's den and come up with lines and crack each other up. It was it was the most fun I've ever had.
I love Mystery Science Theater and that kind of stuff, and that just sounds like perfect. And it really takes the wind out of the sails of the stuff that's too serious sometimes, or too silly. I mean, a lot of science fiction shows and superhero shows, they don't know when to stop, and they try to do something that their special effects budget can't handle, and it just looks stupid. And they deserve to be mocked. You know, I had an idea at one point at DC that did not fly. The guys who wrote Mystery Science Theater, all of them, all eras, they were big Mad magazine fans. So I got a tour for them of Mad. They came up to DC and we went to lunch. And I had the idea of taking old like science fiction short stories and Jimmy Olsen short stories from the old days and just having them rewrite the dialogue. And then all it would cost us would be lettering, maybe some art corrections here and there. And I know TV's Frank was really into it. He was so into it, he even did a spec script for it. But the powers that be DC said, I like the monster movies better without the commentary. And I was like, okay, no names, please. But I was just like, this is like free money. This is like the crossover audience of all time. People who read comics watch that show. It's like, it would be perfect.
Yeah.
And they were interested in doing it. And I don't know, you could still do that. So feel free, DC, steal that idea again. But don't. Marvel, don't steal it.
a Woody Allen movie called What's Up, Tiger Lily.
Yeah, that was it.
Mhm.
Right, that was sort of the prototype.
It
That, right?
really was one
Yeah.
of the first ones that did that. And then as time goes by, you have movies like Kung Pao, and where they take an old movie and do crazy things with it, and it's a different kind of fun,
Yeah.
especially to work on, I think.
I would say so.
Do you have any questions about Peter? Like his shoe size was 10 and a half.
That's the beautiful thing, guys. When you talk about someone or talk about your careers, I really don't have any questions because again, you guys lived it. You get to talk about it, so it's fine.
Yes, we lived it. Now we're reliving it. That's the Peter's curse. Do you have people writing in on this right now? Are there people watching this or no?
Yeah, people are watching this, and I have a couple of comments.
Do they have questions?
Mostly not about Peter, but it's about how you feel about AI art. In fact, I'll pull it up right now.
Are you kidding?
Yeah. Yeah, see what I mean?
Well, I don't think AI is good because it's going to be stealing Peter David's style and making new money for somebody else, and I don't think that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, while we can fight imitation and AI training when it comes to things that we've original work that we've done. The Star Trek work, for instance, was all work for hire. So
Yeah.
everything I did, everything Peter did, and that's probably about 70 novels altogether, is all fair game for AI training.
Yeah.
So they really can steal Peter's style.
But shouldn't
And-
Paramount be trying to protect that stuff? I mean, that's their stuff. That's
I
their
think
IP.
they're probably facilitating it,
Yeah.
because they can then they can have Star Trek novels and style, and
Yeah.
I think the bottom line here is we're not for AI.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm all for AI helping somebody compose. There's not a lot that it's helpful for, but maybe like a form letter if you're in a business like a real estate, that kind of thing, where it's not a creative letter. If you're doing anything that's creating something from nothing, that should come from the human part of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say, if you want to sit in your room and create stuff and have fun with it, sure. If it never leaves the the walls of your room, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's your fan fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as it gets out into the world, it's fraudulent.
Especially if you start making pennies off of it, that's not right.
Yeah.
Because then you're making pennies off of somebody else's years and years and years of learning how to do something.
Yeah.
And there's enough people to compete with. You don't need good old machines to compete with.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's a reason that we like John Henry, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I would say so.
One of the probably the last thing you could say Peter wrote was a story in a collection that I edited called Phenomenons, and it was a superhero series, and he contributed to the first volume and the second volume, and in the third volume he was already in the nursing home, the institution he was in. And so I went over there. I wanted a Peter story in that last volume, and I wanted to give him a chance to write. Really, he couldn't sit at the computer and write, but we could collaborate on something.
Yeah, yeah.
We sat there in the home and worked out a story, which was published in the last volume.
That's great.
Wow.
Well, yeah, just having that kind of mental activity is good for a guy in a bad situation,
Yeah.
and that's nice that you did that.
Well, I will say that so I went to visit him at this home, and I hadn't seen him in about, I'm sure it was at least 6 months. And when I got there, he talked to me like he knew me, but his wife told me afterwards it took him about 10 minutes to figure out who I was.
Oh boy.
But then once he did, you could tell he was making very specific references. He
Yeah.
knew exactly what he was talking. Once he kind of woke up, he knew exactly what he was talking about.
Well, you gotta. I mean, when you're in that situation, you just got to keep the old brain alive, and that's what visits are great for that. And I give you a lot of credit for that. I mean, I have had minimal contact with Peter in our whole careers together, and it was mostly me just being an executive behind the scenes on most projects or whatever, except for that Marvel versus DC thing, which really, again, was the most fun I ever had. I've said it before. I'll say it again. They just reprinted that in an omnibus at DC and Marvel. And I think that also helped open the doors to doing more Marvel and DC crossovers again, which is great. It is just great. And it's great for people, for the writers like Peter, who are fans of comics. There's still some of us out there, there's people who grew up loving comics. And, when I was a kid, when I read a comic, I knew people did them. I knew that a Denny O'Neil wrote this, and I knew that a Neil Adams drew this, but it never occurred to me that it could have been a different story if they wanted it to be. I just assumed that this was the story that came, and they put it down, and now it's in my house. But once you figure that out as a professional, that you can really do a which way story for every single story in your mind before it's published, so that you can pick the best way to go or whatever. There's nothing better than having, two heads are better than one situations, where you can really play, can you top this, before it's an actual comic, and it just gets stronger and better. And when I did that thing with Grunwald and Ron Mars and Peter David, it was just a riot to try to top each other and outdo each other. And it was the most fun. I highly recommend check out that omnibus if you've never read the story. It's a lot of fun. And they put out a collection of the Amalgam comics as well. And and now they're back to doing Marvel versus DC. And now I don't work at either Marvel or DC now, so I don't get anything out of this. But they're still just fun stories. And I love that they're reprinting stuff that we did 30 years ago. Yeah. And somebody is getting to it for the first time. It's just the best.
Well, along the lines of two heads are better than one. There was this time when I wanted to do a Dead Man story for Legends of the DC annual. And
okay, I might have been the editor of that.
You were certainly the editor.
Oh, well, whoops.
and I came to you and I said, I want to do this Dead Man story. It's about a murder mystery. It takes place at the circus and yada yada yada. And you said, and you said, and you gave me a videotape of the Todd. What was Todd? I forget his name.
What is that? Not Todd Browning.
Browning.
Oh,
maybe?
Freaks.
Todd Browning,
yeah.
I think is.
Yeah, Todd Browning is the Freaks.
Right, and you gave it to me, and you said, "Watch this." There's a 10-page story. I have to go watch this movie, and I went home. I watched the movie, and I'm 100% sure that I wrote a much better story having seen that movie.
Oh, that's so fun!
I've never been as indebted to an editor as I was.
I have witnesses. Everybody, pay attention.
making me watch that movie. It was a on
Well,
your
I
part.
probably couldn't believe you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, it's true, and I've seen it too, but it made it a much better story, and so I'm indebted.
Oh wow, I didn't have any idea that I ever did anything good. So that's nice to hear, I have to
I mean,
say.
mind you, there's no money in this,
No,
but
no.
I am indebted.
It was only a 10-pager after all.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, to me, when I was an editor, that was the most fun, was just saying, "Oh, that's a cool idea. What if you did this? What if that happened?" And then you didn't have to take the suggestion, but maybe it would trigger something else in your brain to make it a better story or whatever, and or not. I mean, then you just do the story you pitched to me or whatever. I used to like coming up with cover copy as well. Those were the most fun aspects because it was just a small little creative contribution to selling the comic book. I don't even think they put cover copy on comics anymore. It's
Don't think so.
pretty wild.
Yeah.
Well, and at $5 a pop, I'm not even going to go and find out if they put cover copy on comics anymore.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for saying that. It means a lot because I do think that the editors kind of get blamed for a lot of things too. So that was nice.
Oh, come on. So you had a couple of phone calls during the Death of Superman saga. So what? It just
From Harlan Ellison.
What?
Yeah, Harlan Ellison called me at home. He called me at home to yell at me, which is very Harlan. And he started yelling at me about taking Superman away from the public. He belongs to the public. And I said, no, he actually belongs to Warner Brothers, believe it or not. And by the end of the phone call, I had convinced him that the storyline opened more doors than it closed. And he, basically was calmed down and cool about it. And then I just had the question of who gave him my home phone number. That pissed me off more than anything.
Probably.
Yeah, I think I knew who it was. Marv.
Oh, man.
Peter was friends with Harlan as well.
Yeah, but I don't think Peter had my home phone number. Well, yeah, but I was listed in the phone book, but most people didn't think to look in the Brooklyn phone book.
Oh man.
So that was fun. Yeah, and it really is. It's always fun to just bounce ideas off somebody. Because I mean, as a novelist, you sit in a room by yourself and you're just doing this stuff, and you don't know if it's a good idea or not. You think it's a good idea, but you just don't know. And until there's an audience for it, and that is better off your being a collaborator, I think, because they're the first audience, and they're not spending any money on this story yet. And that's why I loved working on the Superboy TV show with Andy Helfer, because we shored up each other's strengths. He was a better typer than I was, so he did all the typing and I did all the talking. But it worked out great. And it was fun because we would each come up with cool elements or cool premises that would inspire the other guy. And that's the way to do it. And as you say, Peter was a good collaborator in that respect.
Yeah. He was a very, very generous collaborator. One of the things we collaborated on was the Bible for a Will Smith movie.
Oh,
this
really?
Was a movie that bombed, although not our fault. After Earth was it was a vehicle for Will's son.
Kid. Yeah.
And it had some issues which were exacerbated by Sony's ham-handed participation. But when things looked pretty good, we went to Philadelphia to watch them shooting the interiors. And Will had a double-decker bus that he parked outside this incredibly big warehouse, right, where they were doing all the shooting. And we were working directly with Will's brother-in-law and a guy named Caleb. And at one point, Caleb said to us, "Will would like to see you." And the only person I knew who was a bigger kid than Peter was Will. So we go into this bus, and it's kind of got a spiral staircase going
Mhm.
from where the bus driver would up to the second floor.
Yeah.
And Peter goes first, and then Bob and I follow. And as Peter gets up to the second floor, Will jumps out from behind a bulkhead and goes,
Oh,
out of Peter, and Peter goes, "Ah!"
Peter
And
could have
Will
fallen down the stairs.
Yeah.
or he could have heart attack, right? And Will goes, "You screamed like a girl. You
Oh.
screamed like a little girl."
And then he slapped him.
Right? Well, that was practice. But it was fun. It was fun to see Peter and Will kind of in the same room, because they were alike in a way. You know, they were both kind of kids in adult bodies.
I think that's pretty much all of us, you know.
Yeah.
That's why we're collectors of toys and comics and things like that. And
Yeah.
and our wives hate us for it.
That's right. I'm here in my
Yeah.
office. This is the only place I'm allowed to have that stuff.
Me too. Same here. Oh, I lie. I have some stuff in the foyer of walking into our apartment. And it's great for when guests come, because then they see some fun stuff instead of the usual, you know, doilies and grandma stuff. Because we're at the age now where we're grandparent age, and we don't have the cool stuff anymore. Or
Right.
people assume we don't.
Yeah. But
But it's like, I have to say, in this last year, I had some medical stuff myself, and and my dog is upset with this story, but I had some medical stuff, and then we had those big fires out here in LA
Yeah.
at the beginning of the year, and I was like, I got a lot of stuff here. What if I die and then my wife is stuck with all this stuff? So I'm starting to purge and getting rid of some things now, because I'm old enough now that I'm like, am I ever going to look at this again? Am I ever going to watch Freaks again? You know, and I have a bunch of original art that people have given me over the years. And it's like, I don't want that to go up in a fire if the fire comes my way. You know, we're pretty okay here in Burbank, but it's just like, if I spread the collection around the world, it won't all go up in one fire. You know, so I'm starting to look into getting rid of some of the stuff, and I'm fine with it. And I'm glad I saved it all these years, and anything I worked on, I'm signing so my wife can sell after I'm dead.
You know, I'm sort of in the same boat. I find that if I sell the stuff, first of all, it makes me look at it, whereas it might just sit in the cabinet otherwise. So I get to look at it one last time, and then it gets into the hands of someone else who'll enjoy it.
Yep,
So
it goes to a loving home, and that's important.
You know, Peter's widow, Kathleen, is going to be selling a bunch of his memorabilia. So something to look out for if you're a Peter fan.
Is that going to be like a heritage thing, or?
I'm not sure. I don't know that she's gotten to that point yet. But,
yeah.
I'm
sure that's going to be hard too, but obviously they were in need of some monetary help there at the end. So that is definitely a good way to help smooth those issues over for her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, and maybe someone else will enjoy the Batcave. Who knows?
You can't sell the Batcave.
Yeah.
You can sell parts of the Batcave.
Yeah.
That's funny. It's like when the show ended, another network was interested in picking up the Batman TV show, but they didn't do it because they had already taken the Batcave apart and gotten rid of it.
Yeah.
They had struck the set.
That sounds familiar, but
It
I
did.
don't think
It's what happened.
Wow.
I mean, nowadays there's so many streamers and channels and places that you would probably leave the set up for a little while as they try to sell it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But back then it was just like, well, Batman's done, and it took another 15 years before it came back again as a movie.
Yeah.
Now every 2 years there's a new Spider-Man movie with a different Spider-Man in it. It's a different world now.
Yeah. There really is.
And you know what? I think, I say leave the Batcave, and when Kathleen is selling the house, somebody gets a bonus.
Yeah,
They're
right,
buying the Batcave.
So, what's this?
Wow, how much is that giant penny worth?
Right.
Is that where they got Alfred's last name from? I don't know.
Oh.
It's a good one.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And what?
So,
Yes.
Do any of your viewers here have any other questions or anything? Or
no, not really. But I actually do have a Peter David story.
oh, okay.
But this was as a fan. I didn't approach him as a writer. It was my first year at Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con. It was 2010. I was very excited. I went through, see everybody. I saw, the lead artist of Superman number 75 got his autograph, Dan. Fantastic guy. I got hit on by Counselor Troy of Next Generation, getting her autograph, so that was nice. But I kept looking at comic people, I got, I get to Peters now. I was like, okay, I have to beeline to him. I got to speak to him. I got to talk to him. This is my first year in college. I'm about to be, start a career in comics myself. So I'm like, I want to experience, Peter David, because I love his writing. I grew up, reading his stuff, including his Star Trek stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually had one of the issues with me. It's actually from the Death Before Dishonor, arc. And he signed it for me. And we spoke for about 5 minutes. I forget what the conversation was about. And he's like, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm going to School of Visual Arts, and I'm going to be, hopefully, a comic writer and illustrator. And I'm probably remembering this, as a fanboy, but he's like, don't ever stop. Don't ever stop. I just took that with me. Then I went to his panel where I found out that he killed off Betty Ross, and why he did it. I was like, okay, all right, that's that. But I always took that with me.
But you stopped because now you're just talking on the TV here.
Well, Mike, I don't really stop because I actually am illustrating while we're talking.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, getting advice from people is always good, and I'm sure he said that to a lot of people, and some of you didn't stop, and that's what's good,
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder. I wonder if I had allowed myself to be discouraged at some point in my career, I never would have written comics. I never would have written books. I never would have written anything, because let's face it, it's a tough road to hoe. And
well, I didn't. Nobody ever told me this, but this is what I tell people, and it's why I didn't get discouraged, because I have my giant envelope of rejection slips from trying to sell stuff to. Like I figured I couldn't draw superhero comics because I don't draw well enough. But I would send gag cartoons back in the day when the New Yorker and others ran gag cartoons. Now it's just the New Yorker. but I have my rejections from Playboy. I have rejections from National Lampoon. I got rejections from everybody and their brother. And it didn't bother me just because I didn't think they owed me anything. And I was somebody who was I was a speed bump to their day. So I was already in the way. And it's like, if you can get past that, it's great, because that's encouraging. But the main thing to do is to just don't take anything personally, because they don't know who you are. They are literally just judging the work. They may not have a spot for it, and they may love it, and they still may not have room for it somewhere. And you got to just not take any criticism personally, because it's never personal, because they don't know you at that stage. Later on, it's personal. Then there's problems. That's when problems happen, but not with Peter David, because his ideas were always fun and different.
It's good advice. Good advice. Although I have to take exception to one thing. I remember you being a pretty decent owner.
No,
I remember
not really.
Maybe little something. I thought you were good.
Like I said, I did cover sketches, and they were good enough to get the idea across for a real artist to make something out of it. And that, I was an intern at DC in 1974, and I went in there thinking, I'm going to draw comics for DC. I love Neil Adams. Everything I see in my head looks like a Neil Adams drawing, except when it comes out, it looks like garbage. But the job of an intern back then was to Xerox pages that came in. So I was Xeroxing Walt Simonson's Manhunter pages, and Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing pages, and Jack Kirby even Commandy pages. And I was like, looking at him, I was like, I am never going to be able to do this. I would never have the patience to do this, because you really have to be able and willing to draw everything on the planet Earth, and then the made up stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it was just like, I can't draw the bottom of a car. I really can't draw. If Superman's lifting a car, I couldn't possibly do a bottom of a car if I had to. And I just said, I'm kind of funny sometimes, so let me just go the comedy route. And at that time, there was Mad Magazine, which was kind of a closed shop, and Cracked, which I didn't know who they were. I thought maybe they were a little fly-by-night. But Marvel was doing Crazy Magazine. And so I geared a lot of my portfolio to stuff that I could show Crazy Magazine. And that's how I got my foot in the door. And I was right to go for the funny side of things, I think. But there's not a lot of outlets for that stuff anymore. It's a real bummer, but I think I was right to stay out of the superhero comic business as an artist. I actually influenced way more comics by being behind the scenes, doing 6 or 8 books a month instead of just one. And that was fun. And I could do the ideas for cover sketches, or I did actual thumbnail layouts on artboards for several issues of Superman, because Ordway was falling behind, and I just did the scribbly cartoon drawings, and he turned it into real art by penciling over what I did. And it helped him time-wise, because he wasn't starting with a blank page. And I accidentally got to draw comics.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I appreciate that vote of confidence. I do think I can draw well enough to get ideas across, but that's not the same when you're competing with Adam Hughes and Frank Chose and the guys who I just admire. Steve Rude, they can draw, and they make it look easy. And if they're meeting their deadlines, then it is easy for them. And I don't think I could have done that.
Yeah. Certainly, I never. There was a point where I was like 5 years old, and I was drawing like a different superhero character every day. I think, wow, I'm getting good at this. I could really draw. And then I said, I kind of made a an unconscious choice. Am I going to draw? Am I going to write? And I think I made the right choice. You know, I'm going to write.
Yeah.
I might have been like a kind of a decent hack artist, maybe,
Yeah.
but that would have been it.
Well, and that's not good for comics either. So it's good that we knew
Right.
this stuff, you know, because I think, you know, people like Len Wein, they started wanting to draw comics as well, and I think Marv too, Marv Wolfman. I think they got in wanting to draw, and wisely we all end up writing instead of just drawing and ruining somebody else's stories.
The world is a better place for it.
Yes.
Absolutely. This is the last comic of the evening. Well, yes, I do have to answer that question. You got to watch the whole thing.
We talked about I talked about collaborating with Peter. I will say that whenever we collaborated, Peter would always find the coolest part of the story to write. We wrote a novel, Deep Space Nine novel, where, among other things, Ro Laren meets Kira Nerys. Now, they were basically the same character. The Ro Laren character was discontinued because the actress didn't want to get involved with Deep Space Nine, so they came up with essentially the same character in Deep Space Nine, and Peter got the part of the book to write where they meet and they work together. So it's so Ro Laren, Kira Nerys, it's essentially the same character working with the same character, and that was the coolest part. And he always saw, wait a second, that's the part, that's the best part, that's the part I'd like to do.
See, that's kind of a fanboy idea. And I think that's what was good about Peter, and kind of what we always did was we didn't forget what was fun for us when we were readers. And I think that's or viewers. And I think that's what Peter did really well.
Of course.
This was a pleasure for us.
Yeah. I can't thank you both for coming on and talking to us. It's always a treat to talk to you guys, obviously, but to share the stories about Peter, your personal stories about him is fantastic. And it gets people, you know, invested in what he did, you know, his writing. And for, you know, fans that don't know about his writing, it gets more new fans to be interested and say, you know what, let me just check out his stuff, you know, see what he was about.
Yeah,
so it keeps him alive. It keeps him relevant.
It's always worth seeking out guys who did it well. And
Yeah.
Peter was one of the guys who did it well for many years.
Yeah.
No flash in the pan stuff there.
Okay. I'm not going to, I thank you for saying that, but compared to these guys, I can't be the same league. I can't be the same league.
Well, somebody's got to take over the job when we're done. So
Right.
Have fun, make it fun, keep it fun, and don't take it personally.
And if you can find an editor like Mike Carlin,
yeah, a guy who gives out free movies in his office.
right.
Hey, that helped you. That helped you make create a better story, Michael. It did.
Absolutely, it did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
But Peter, it's great that he has a legacy. You know, not many people pass away and leave so much of themselves behind for people to connect with and enjoy. So that's something that writers have, artists have that most people don't.
It's true. Yeah. So that's everybody's assignment. Go out and hunt down some Peter David stuff and enjoy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Look for Aquaman and the Hulk and the Atlantis Chronicles and his Star Trek original series comics.
And the cool Supergirl series.
Yeah.
Right.
If you could find something like this
Yes.
Yeah, definitely pick it up. Well, fellas, I thank you both for coming on and talking to us, and definitely have to do something like this again at some point. But just just the good times.
Well, when I die, I hope I can actually join you still and be on the podcast with you.
I'm pretty sure there'll be a hologram of you, Mike. There'll be a hologram, and it's like,
Oh, that's what
okay.
the AI is working on right now.
This sounds like another Dead Man story.
Ooh.
It's
Mike,
true.
I'm gonna pitch this to you tomorrow.
That's the next Star Trek story too. A whole ship manned by the dead characters
Ooh,
called
okay.
red shirts.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. All right. Well, I'm Ian Miller, and this has been Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, folks. Have a good night.
Happy weekend, everybody.
Happy Friday.